So those are the mouse keys. If you click on the right mouse button, it brings up the quad menu. Now, right now, we've only got two blocks. This is a context-sensitive menu, meaning that it will only show what features you can actually use. Right now, I would have to convert this to an editable poly. Now this torus is an editable poly, and there's our quad. Okay, and they're broken down: tools 1, tools 2, display, transform. Just it gives you quick access to the tools that are over here in your modify panel. Okay, and that brings us to the command area. You've got different tabs. This is where you actually create your primitives. You start off with the create tab, and here I've created several primitives: a torus, two spheres, and a box. These are parametric primitives, which means, well, the torus is now a polygon, but a polygonal object, I should say. But the other objects are parametric. If I go to the modify panel, they have parameters. Again, radius, segments, hemisphere. These are parameters there, and these are primitives. Therefore, they're parametric primitives. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, I turned the torus into a polygonal object, which is the more useful when you're doing complex modeling, because now you can push and pull polygons, bevel polygons, like this. Okay. And do all sorts of other things that we'll get to in more advanced classes. Again, this is an editable poly. You start off with primitives, but you don't usually stay with primitives. Primitives are primitive, and they don't have very much usefulness, or I should say, they're not very versatile. You start off with a box, you start off with a cylinder, and then you go from there. In the next tutorial, we will probably be modeling a lamppost, so we would start off with a cylinder and push and pull polygons, extrude, bevel, that kind of thing, and that would give us the final product. Okay. So that's the command panel. You have the create panel where you have geometry, which is 3D objects. You have shapes, which is 2D splines, which we'll go over in depth later on. You have lights, camera, helper tools, which are helpful. You've got warps, which we won't use very much in this tutorial series, but they're there. And then we've got system tools, which we will use, the sunlight and daylight systems. Possibly use the biped for visualization purposes. But that's the little cog, gear and cog system up here. Once you get an object placed, let's say I've got this 2D spline, and if I were to render right now, notice how the spline has disappeared. That's because it is a non-renderable object. It's just a 2D line. It has no thickness. So we go over to our modify panel, which I tell my students is the blue macaroni because it looks like a blue elbow macaroni. You click on that, and these are our tools for modifying different primitives and polygonal objects. So if I want to add some thickness to this object, I could go over here to the modifier list and pick extrude, and then go up, and there's our object. If I render again, there's our triangle, or now it's a wedge, I would say. But that's one of the things you can do in modifier list. You can also select objects and say edit poly. Now this is the same thing I did with this, except I still retain the parametric base object, but now I can come in here and do polygonal modeling as well. Okay, notice the instance changes. Now this object has been destroyed, or its parametric properties has been destroyed, whereas this object, the edit poly object, uses non-destructive tools. Okay, again, I can always go back to the original primitive. It'll give me this warning. I'll say yes. I can change the radius of the sphere, change the number of segments. Now you don't really want to do this once you do a lot of modeling, because if you change, say, the number of segments on here, this polygon may no longer exist. Okay, so that's why it gives you the warning. But just know that you can still go back down here to the sphere. You can also delete the modifier, and you're back to the original parametric primitive. So both of these techniques have their strengths and their weaknesses. Sometimes you're just not going to be able to get away with not using, not converting your parametric primitive to a polygonal object. It just depends on the situation. And another thing is, you don't want a lot of modifiers if you're switching between, say, 3ds Max and another program, because modifiers are very proprietary. You probably will want to, if you select this object, for instance, you probably want to collapse it all. Say yes, now it's an editable mesh. We can create an editable poly. Now this object is perfect for export to other programs, whereas the ones with modifiers on them, there's always problems, and usually they won't completely export, if they export at all. You'll get warnings. So you generally you're going to want to stick with collapsed objects or editable polys, so that you can get the most bang for your buck with your model. Again, the Create tab and the Modify tab are the two most useful. You also have Hierarchy, which we'll get to when we get to the link tools. We have the Motion panel, which comes in handy when we're using sunlight and daylight. We have the Display, which allows us to display objects that exist or don't exist, that different shapes, for instance, and geometry. We have the Utilities panel, say the Measuring tool. I can select this, click on Measure, and now I know exactly how large this is. X is 14 feet, Y is 16 feet, and of course I've got cubic feet and square feet. The center of the mass, and now you can see I've created a center point, this little magenta crosshair here. So these come in handy again. Max Script, if you find Max Scripts on the internet, or if you're a budding programmer and you want to create Max Scripts, you can click on this and add scripts to your scene. Usually these are similar to macros in, say, Word. They do a lot of repetitive tasks quickly and with one click of a button, as opposed to, several dozen clicks.